Welcome back to the Team Hybrid Racing YouTube channel. Today we're going to be looking at how to swap or install an alternator on your GM 53, 57, whatever combination you have, from the passenger side to the driver's side. And I'll get into detail as to why we would want to do that here on the S10 Project Chili Pepper. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, I'll link the video above, kind of showing a bit of the backstory of the truck, where I got it, how I got it, and just bringing it home. So let's get started. So here's the 5.3 and the S10. And as you can kind of tell, if you're familiar at all with how these are set up, there was an alternator here where this wire is. That's the power wire going to it. This truck is equipped with an F-body style front accessory. So we've got the balancer down there, the water pump, power steering pump over here on this side. And then typically your alternator and your tensioner would be mounted here. Now, some of the reasons you may want to move the alternator from the passenger side to the driver's side, like we're going to do today, is a lot of these swap cars, the suspension setup really doesn't allow for the accessories to be mounted low, although this one is high. So maybe a more common reason, and the reason we're going to do it today, is for potential for future turbo. So this manifold we have here, you see on the floor, this bolts to the passenger side, and then the driver's side comes around from the back and comes in through the bottom, and then you mount your turbo here. So that puts the turbo roughly right here where the alternator was. Because of that, we're going to now place it over here. Now you can see we've got the intake running right now, kind of in the way, so as part of this process, we're going to move it to the other side. So we've picked up these ICT brackets. I've used them on the 240 and a number of other cars. They're great. I love them. USA made. I believe they have a lifetime warranty. They're fantastic. So you see we've got part 551577-2. The 2 stands for the F-body and GTO placement. I believe 1 might be Corvette and 3 is the truck, but don't quote me on that. It might be the other way around. But simply this does, and I'll get the instructions out and show you a little bit more, but this is the bracket that we'll be using to hold on both the power steering pump and the alternator to the driver's side. And then along with that, we're going to go ahead and mount part number 551617X-2. Again, that's the Camaro and GTO spacing for the manual tensioner. So that way we can tighten up the belt. So let's go ahead and get these apart. We'll get the instructions out and take a look at what we need to do. And then we'll also need to pull off the intake and get that out of our way, and then eventually put it back on the passenger side. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is remove the intake. If you have a simple aftermarket setup like this, you pretty much just need a screwdriver, and then we want to unplug the air temp sensor on the back side here. This truck has a Holley, so you just a simple squeeze on here. It's marked, and then we have a clamp on the front. So I'll go ahead and loosen this up, and that should take the whole intake off. Not a lot to it, especially when you have an aftermarket system. So what we'll end up doing is flipping this around, mounting it back on here, and then rotating the filter so it goes down in the truck. Obviously, we can't have it sticking up out of the hood. I am not a big fan of stuff sticking out of the hood or anywhere else in the truck. So let's set this aside, and then I'll show you guys a little bit more what we got working on here, as well as the brackets. So with the intake tube out of the way, we can get a better look at where the power steering reservoir sits, pump just below that. And then over here off to the side is where we're going to mount the alternator. So just to give you a rough idea, we may have to mess with these brake lines here a little bit, but that's where it's going to sit off to the side here, maybe a little bit higher. I'm not exactly sure where the brackets fit it, but so again, we're just taking it from where it normally sits, and here's a better representation. It was sitting kind of up here next to the throttle body, and moving it over here to this side. So we'll get the brackets out of the packages here, laid out, get our tools ready, and start mounting the first piece. All right, so we're going to start with, actually we might just toss the tensioner on first, because that's pretty easy, and we've got space for it. So let's open this package. Got our first bracket, some instructions. This one should be pretty straightforward. Let's get the other bracket out of here. And all this does is just tighten up the the 13 billet. Our hardware, spacers, and this kit even comes with a new pulley, which is nice. I can get this out of here. There we go. And like I just mentioned, the new pulley. Okay, so according to instructions, we've just got this bracket, which is the slider, this piece that goes on here, which allows us to adjust it. We'll bolt this to the water pump, and then from there we'll go ahead and get our spacer and our new pulley on there, as well as the washer, and that'll get bolted on. So fairly easy process. Let me grab a couple tools, and then we'll get this on the truck as step one. Alright, so this ICT bracket mounts in the same spot where the factory tensioner would go, except in this instance, obviously, we're working with a manual tensioner. So step one is going to be putting some of these brackets together. The first piece we will use is this bracket here, as well as the part that slides. So to put those together, we've just got a little bolt here. We'll get that started. These are 6mm. So we won't tighten this all the way just yet, but we'll get it started. So we've got a spot on there. And then from there, we'll take our two spacers. And our other two long bolts, and these spacers will actually go behind to space this out, so that way our tensioner pulley lines up with our water pump. So drop these guys through. Back there, and then the water pump itself is threaded. So let's get that on there. Just start these by hand. Hopefully you guys can see that. Snug these up. Okay, so there you can see the bracket is now mounted. Slide this back up. It's starting to get tight from moving it too much. There we go. Okay, all right, and then the next step, we want to go ahead and put our step spacer, washer, and our last bolt on as well. So this is the spacer that sits behind the pulley. I think this pulley is symmetrical. I don't think it matters what side. That slides in there. Our pulley spins, and then this bolt is obviously too small. Before we put the pulley on, there's a smaller bolt here that goes through the back. This is what you'll tighten to lock this in place. So we'll get that hand tight. And that just keeps this from moving around. Grab my 13mm. That's what these are. So for now, we'll just set that there, kind of lock it in place. And then our pulley on the front. Be sure to put the washer on the front here. That way when you tighten down this bolt, you don't lock the pulley in place. You want that pulley to spin free. So really that's it as far as the tensioner. Let me grab the camera and I'll bring it around so you guys can see a little better. So there's the tensioner installed. Again, we gotta just tighten it down, get this wire out of the way, but you can see how the spacing lines up. You can see the power steering pump. You can see the line on the pulley, and then the crank pulley down there. So all you do is, once you have a belt, you can put 3/8 ratchet in the back here. You loosen this with a wrench, pull this back with the ratchet and tighten it down. So super simple, easy install, but something that we need to do for over here. Hopefully that is not in the way. We'll be sure to get a small short belt so that our tensioner is pretty far back. I don't know if I can move it right now. I kind of tightened it up too much. There we go. But we'll want to try to get a shorter belt so this is sitting further back and out of the way. We have more space. Okay, so let's go ahead and get everything else unboxed out of the package for the alternator. And I think step one is going to be to get that power steering pump off there. It already has a bracket, but this new one incorporates both. So take a look at that. All right, so looking at the power steering pump, the pump itself is located on the bracket with 2 bolts typically. I thought it would be like the 240 used to be with 2 10mm bolts. One of them you can see here. These are actually Allen heads on this kit. So because I can't get to it with a wrench from the side, we're actually gonna have to remove the pulley. I have a pulley remover kit. If you don't have one of these, I think you can rent them at the auto parts store, but I'll show you how it works. Essentially, you clamp the end of the pulley in here and use this to slowly pull the pulley itself off, and then you can get access to those bolts. So let me get the camera set up and I'll show you guys that quick process. All right, step one, we've got a piece that actually threads into the pump. So once we get that started, and it'll just bottom out here. These kits typically have a few different lengths. Then we'll take our next piece here and slide that over, let it thread on. Now what we need to do is put our 2 collars. So we have 2 halves, this clamshell. One side goes on the pulley and one side goes on the tool. So just like that. And then we have a sleeve that holds that in place. Now all we do, take a couple wrenches. You hold this one in place on the back side here. This kit is like a half, and then slowly, and we can probably start this by hand until it backs up. Back this up a little bit. And once it starts to grab, that's when we need to keep the other end in place. Let's see if I can get it. There. Then you take this and just start backing it off. And that will slowly pull the pulley itself off because it's just pressed on. And you can use the same tool to put it back on. Obviously we'll have to do that once this is done. Grab a different wrench because that one slipped. Alright, so I got you a little bit better view there as well. Let's see if we can get this guy to come loose. Alright, we're in the home stretch. These things sometimes are just an absolute pain to get off. But it's going. I can tell it's quite a bit out further. Whoops. Alright, so now we've got the pump off. Let's pull the sleeve, the collars. Get those out of the way. And we'll just unscrew this, which is probably stuck in the pump from being so tight, but luckily you can get a wrench on it as well. Yep. It's good. So we'll get a wrench on the back side. I don't know if you guys probably can't see it. Let me finish taking this off and then you can take a look. sometimes the piece that we threaded in will get stuck. So there's the pulley off. And you can see one of the bolts here, and then the exact same one over here. And like I said, these are Allen, which is why we had to take the pulley off. Yay for us. And let's see here. Yeah, okay. So again, there's different ways to do this. Definitely don't try to use a pulley on plastic. The pulleys, or don't try to use a puller on the pulley on the outside, because they are plastic, and that will not work. So that might be stuck in there. We'll get it out afterwards. We gotta, to put it back on, we use the same tools, so we'll get it out afterwards. Not a big deal. All right, so now we just need to figure out what size those elements are. Maybe we'll get lucky and they're the same that we've been using. Yeah, so 6, crack them loose. They've been on here for a little while. Awesome. And then we should be able just to pull this and set it out of the way for now. That way we don't have to disconnect any hoses or anything like that. So we'll get this guy loose. This one over here. Unfortunately, that puller's in my way. So why wouldn't it be? New fan once again. All right, let me get the pump off there. It's just those 2 bolts out of the way, and we'll come back to this. Okay, so we've got the old bracket off, and then the pump I've just kind of slid out of the way because we're going to be working in this area. So here's the old bracket. You may have a bracket, an aftermarket one like this, Dirty Dingo, ICT, I'm sure there's a few others, or even maybe the factory bracket. And this is what will replace it. So you can kind of see this is a similar design as to what we've got going over here. The main difference is this extra piece. As well as I think we just get a little bit more robustness, I guess, with this bracket, because it is also holding the alternator. So we got the instructions here. We'll put the first plate on with some spacers, and then get our second plate on with additional spacers. At that point, we can slide the alternator in, and then the power steering pump will actually go on last. This kit also comes with an idler pulley, which goes in between. And then once everything's on, we can get the correct belt. I got to check to see what belt it suggests. We have a belt. I don't know if it's going to be the right one, though, so we may have to go pick one up. But let's go ahead and get started with this first bracket. You'd simply just a few spacers in the back, get a few of the bolts started, and then we'll get the front one on. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so we've got our back bracket, 2 spacers on both sides here, and then these are 40mm long bolts. So we're going to very, very loosely thread these into the head. It's the 2 top bolts that these go into, and the reason we're going to go loose with it is the next bracket has longer bolts, and there will be some spacers in there as well. So we're going to need to feed the bolts through and then put the spacers behind it. But for now, these 2 short ones will go in first. They should be a 6mm, just like everything else we've used so far. Let's see if we can get that started. Okay, so that's started. Loose enough that we can still put additional spacers back behind. So let me grab the other piece. All right, so this is where it gets a little tricky with all the spacers, but we'll get it figured out. So you take your front bracket, grab the instructions here because it's a little tricky. So here's our front bracket. We've got 2 M10 100 bolts. One goes through here and one goes through the bottom here. So with those on, they both get, looks like 2-inch spacers. And then we have a third spacer that's going to go on the bottom. And it's going to have another bolt that holds that. and that bolt is actually for the idler. So I'm going to hold off on this one at the moment. These two bolts that go through, I believe, also have these spacers on the back side. So it's a little tricky, but let's see if we can get this to slide through there and see if it makes any bit of sense to you guys. We're also getting kind of tight on space here with the everything sitting in here. Woo, it's gonna be tough. Now my pump is in the way. I didn't realize it sat so low. Boy, that's tricky. Okay, so now our power steering line is kind of in the way. This may also get a little tricky with how the line runs, if it's going to fit through the bracket itself. If you guys can see, but get your high pressure line on the bottom, the bigger one, and then the return is on the top, just coming out of the reservoir. So we got to make sure that that line is going to fit and be happy with the pump, and it may have to go through the center. So once we get it together, there's a chance I may have to take one of these bolts back out just so I can get the hose ran through there and start again. So let me see if I can get this sorted out, but I'll show you guys the end result. Okay, I had the wrong bolts here, and I've moved the pump out of the way now. So make sure you've got the right size bolts. There are 3 different lengths. That slides through the bottom. Then we need our shorter spacers on the back side. This is where it gets a little tricky. You do have to kind of slide them in simultaneously. So there's the top one. I'm going to start it. The bottom one. Okay, so again, everything's kind of just hand tied at the moment. Perfect. So now we'll go ahead and snug up all those bolts. We can start putting everything else on. Alright, so I had to actually disconnect the hoses on the power steering pump. Just the routing on this truck is a little tricky. But I'll show you guys, we got the 2 brackets in. So we got the 2 main bolts holding the front on with the spacers. And then, I don't know if you can see it, but down in there, there's spacers in the back as well. So that's all bolted up. And since I took the lines off, now I'm gonna put the power steering pump, slide it in from the top, and then I'll have to set up the lines. I don't know if the factory lines are gonna work with this bracket, but we'll see if we can get them to work. So I'm gonna put that on. It's just 2 bolts that go through the front here, and then mounts into the back to hold the power steering pump in. So I'm gonna try that next and see what we got. All right, the power steering pump is in there. I got both lines kind of just loosely fitting. This one is gonna be tough. So next step, let's get the idler on with the little bushing here. Don't forget the washer like the other pulley. This one just sits down there at the bottom. So go ahead and put this guy on. And then we'll test fit the alternator. Alright, so our idler pulley's on. Again, everything's kind of loose right now. Per the instructions, they want you to put the alternator on first. I think it's definitely easier to put the power steering pump on first. Plus, I had to take this off, and the only way to tighten this is with the alternator out of the way. So let's test fit the alternator and see if we got enough room here. Oh, money. There's just 2 bolts, and then there's washers on the other side. But it looks like we're going to clear everything. So I'm going to take a minute to tighten it down, and then we'll have to figure out what we're going to do with this power steering pump. The high pressure line is, let's just say maybe not fitting. But looks like the alternator is going to work well right there. Perfect. A better view. There you go. Money. Okay, we got both the front bracket, the rear bracket, the alternator. Everything's all set up, snugged down. Just need to put the pulley back on. And then I'm hoping maybe I can bend this bracket just a little bit for the pressure line and the power steering, but I don't know if you can get a good view of it. It's kind of tucked down in there, a little tricky to see. But yeah, that's the install. I think if everything was straightforward with the lines, I'd give it a pretty straightforward install. Difficulty, maybe, I don't know, 2 out of 5. But with the extra adds that I had, that made it a little more tricky. So
I'll get the pulley back on there. It's just a reverse process of what I showed you earlier, and then we'll get a belt and make sure everything's nice and happy. So pretty happy with it though. Glad everything fits. Okay, for our pulley install, first step is just to kind of put this on there and try to get it as straight as possible. So we'll go ahead and slide it over our tool here. Just get just a little pressure and try to get it started so it goes on straight. And then we're going to be using the, parts of the same tool, but the difference here is we've got this piece which threads into the tool that's on the pulley, and then we actually have a bearing that sits on here. So as we turn this, it doesn't also try to turn everything else, and just a simple washer to put up against that. So we'll put the washer on first, and see my pulley came loose. Best thing to do is probably just unscrew this a bunch. If you can see, that way we can just set the bearing and the pulley or the washer on there, slide this over, start threading it on. Once we get this threaded on far enough, we'll reset everything. So that looks like it's locked in. Start tightening this up by hand. Once it starts to grab that pulley, just try to continuously guide it so it does start to go on straight. And once it starts, it'll continue. It's just getting it started is the key. So for my tool with 1/2 inch on the outside here, and then we'll slowly tighten the larger end to push this on. And it should go on, like I said. Once it starts going, it's not too bad. Hopefully it treats us a little bit better. There. Now you'll feel the pulley, the tool bottom out, and that should be lined up. I've always had success with that being fine, but may give it just one more, just to make sure. If you have enough room to put a socket and a ratchet on the other side, the 1/2 inch side here, that makes it super easy. But with the radiator fan, we don't have that option. So yeah, it's all the way tight. So let's loosen this up. All right. I'll get the rest of the tool off here, and then we'll talk about the next steps. Okay, so we've got the power steering pulley on. Everything looks like it's good and aligned. Everything's tightened up. So I had to grab the power wire that goes to the main stud on the back of the alternator. That was sitting over here on the passenger side and ran along the bottom. And that was actually connected on the other end to a fuse block that kind of sits on the front of the truck. Which I'm not crazy about. I'll probably move that and change that up. It controls the fan on the radiator. There's a relay down there and just kind of a junction block. So instead, you can kind of see this red wire. I ran it up and behind, and actually there's a stud on the fuse block that has a 30 amp fuse. So I think that should work for us. So I made a new harness that comes up and around there. So now we've got power connected into the fuse box, battery, etc. Hoping that works. I brought the single wire. It's a single wire alternator. Just tells the alternator yes or no to charge. So that just plugs right here. Easy to get to. And this is quite a long wire here. So we'll probably end up tucking that a little better. I'll run it under here, get this out of the way. And then I had undone the coolant temp sensor, which just sits right down here. It was just kind of in the way. So let's plug that back in. It's just in the head. Well, there we go. Just had to get the right angle. So we'll get that wire tucked better, pulled in here. Obviously, these are kind of universal harnesses, so you have to work with what you have. Unless you want to go through and shorten everything. So we'll adjust this alternator wire. I'll probably tuck it back a little bit further. So now at this point, let's put the intake back on, and then I've got a belt that we can check. Actually, let's check the belt first. So let me grab that belt, see if it's going to work in this combination. If not, we'll have to run to the parts store and grab another one. But we're getting real close to finishing this up. I do like where everything's fitting. It is tricky to get to that hose. If you ever have to replace it, you probably have to pull the alternator. It's just 2 bolts though, super simple. I did get this, it's a little hard to see with how dark it is, but I did get the high pressure hose moved a little bit. So I think I have access to the water pump bolt. So if I do need to pull the water pump, I should be able to get to that bolt. Although I remember in the past that sometimes this pulley can get in the way because it's just such a large pulley and where it sits. But let's go grab that belt, see if that fits, and then from there we'll put the intake back on. All right, I checked through the like 5 or 6 belts I had, nothing fit. Went back to ICT's website, and they recommended the 730K6. So ran out and grabbed one of those. Let's toss it on there and see where we end up. So sneak this down. Tensioner, pulley, and it slides up and over the idler, and then around the alternator, power steering pump, and then just slide it underneath. So I've got the tensioner all the way loose, and we definitely have some slack here. So I mean, this belt's going to work for now, and it keeps it pretty tight. So I'd say that's a good fit. You could probably make a 35 or maybe even a 40 fit. A 25 might bring it down a little bit, but let's go ahead and get the tensioner tight on there. All right, so let's check out the whole system. So there's the alternator, power steering pump. Down there you see the idler, belt goes underneath, water pump, and the tensioner. So yeah, like I said, just be sure to tighten this last one there. And let's see, the light might be a little fuzzy, but yeah, looks good. So let's go ahead and pop on our intake tube, put our temp sensor back in, make sure nothing's in the way, and then we'll start it up and then test to make sure we've got proper voltage. So let me set the camera up out of the way and we'll get the intake back on. All right, so I'm gonna loosen up this here. You can't really see it. This one we're just gonna loosen so we can pivot the filter itself, because it's gonna have to go down. Hopefully everything fits nice for us. Just some basic tubing. So that one's tight. I loosen this up, so I'll tighten it back up. And then our air temp sensor will just sneak over here and connect that back in. That sits nicely behind the throttle body and the intake, so we shouldn't have any problem there. So yeah, like I said, it just tucks down real nice. Let me get my shadow out of the way. Down in that pocket. Out our intake tube. Our temp sensor back in. I think we've got everything connected. So let me flip the battery switch. We'll get the cover off. And we'll go check out if this thing's charging or not. But should be good. And before I forget, actually, I need to put some power steering fluid in. So I'll do that off camera and then we'll check the battery. All right, the battery on the truck is in the truck bed. So let's test the voltage right now and see where we're at. Should be, 12 volts or so. Yep, so 12.44. So I'm gonna go walk up to the front of the truck, start it. It might make a little bit of noise with the power steering pump. I put some fresh fluid in there, but what I want to see is make sure that we're charging the alternator. So start it. It's gonna be extremely loud, but we'll come back here and check the voltage on there. So let me go start the truck. So we're charging. Good to go.
right, well, there was a quick how-to on the ICT upper driver side alternator and power steering mount for the F-body setup. You can see it down there behind me. Um, Again, it wasn't too bad of an install. I think had I not run into, like I said earlier, the issue with having to undo the power steering pump, I still think even though the instructions say to install the pump first and then the alternator, I would put the alternator on first and then the pump. I'm sorry, backwards. I would put the pump on first, then the alternator, just because it would be in the way of that you know low pressure line and getting the clamp to it. It may not be a big deal on your vehicle, but on this one it did. So, but anyhow, hopefully that gave you guys a little bit of instruction on how to do that. And if you're not watching for the instruction and you're watching just for the project, thanks for checking it out. Few things we have to do just to get this thing up and running, and then we'll get to have some fun with this project. I guess I'm kind of at a loss for words, but if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, like, and follow along. That way you can check out future adventures with the S10 here, and then shortly get the 240 back. And I mean, race season's just around the corner, so I am excited for that. And that's about all I got. So thanks, guys.